5-star prediction video. It's like a boomerang. Nope, that's a lie. I haven't talked about the one I just finished in April. Always late to the party. Should I call it cat earring? So our main character, whose name we act 5, or if you've read the book, 7. Hi everybody, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse. Today's video is going to be the 5-star prediction video aftermath, in which I tell you if the 5 books that I picked are actually 5-star predictions. So if you are new to my channel, or maybe you just missed that video, here's a quick previously on Chapter and Converse. But way back in January, I was invited by Sarah from Sarah's Nightstand and Lindsay from Lindsay's Little Library to join their Booklist Thursday 5-star prediction. And I will link both of their channels down below, so if you are watching me first and haven't checked them out yet, definitely do that. And if you are here because you saw their videos, welcome to my channel. And I have to say, if you haven't seen my original video, I'll just tell you guys now, I was so excited and so flattered that they reached out to me and asked me to join them on their Booklist Thursday 5-star prediction. I have been a fan of both of theirs since my discovery of BookTube days and before I was even making videos, and I'm super grateful. Over the course of this, we've gotten to know each other and become friends, and it's just been such a great experience. So I've already recapped 4 of these 5 books in monthly wrap-ups. I just finished the final book in April, so you guys already know some of my thoughts, feelings, and all that other good stuff about it, but here we're going to dive in and I'm going to give you final verdicts if they are 5 stars. So I'm going to talk about the books in the order that I actually read them. And the first book I read was The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. And I loved it, you guys. 5 stars. I'm a fan. I immediately picked up The Broken Girls, and I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to. But I totally enjoyed this book, and I totally get all the hype around it, and I get why everybody was reading it and talking about it and raving about it, because I just loved it. And I loved so many different things about this book. So it's dual timelines, dual points of view. So we've got a mystery in the past, a mystery in the present. There's like all the things that I love in a book happen in this book. And we have 1982 and then we have 2017. So back in 1982, Viv takes the overnight clerk position at the Sundown Motel in upstate New York. And she was on her way to New York City, gets a little bit derailed and winds up kind of, you know, having to get herself a job in this small town, and well, she kind of figures out what's what. And then in 2017, Carly's mom passes away, and her mom was Viv's sister. And Carly has always been obsessed with the story of Viv because Viv mysteriously disappeared, and her mom would never talk about it. So after Carly's mom passes away, she finds herself really kind of lost and untethered, and she decides to try to figure out what happened to her aunt. So she goes to that town in upstate New York where the Sundown Motel still exists, and she starts to investigate what happened to her aunt. And part of that investigation includes taking a job at the Sundown Motel. So one of the things that I loved, did I already say one of the things that I loved? Another thing that I loved about this book is that it's a full-on ghost story, and you know it out of the get-go. So this is not like a Riley Sager, Riverdale, is it supernatural, is it not supernatural, I'm not quite sure. And no shade, I love both of those. Love Riverdale, you guys know I love Riley Sager. But this is more like Nancy Drew, straight up, there's some ghosty stuff happening here. And I am not usually one for the ghost story, but I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Like, I was all in for this book. That said, this was not a book that I would recommend reading before bed if you are a little bit impacted by ghosty things. Because this is definitely one of those books where I was like, oh, this is like totally safe. I can totally read this at night. And then like something would happen and I would be like, nope, 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 nope. Gotta put it down, gotta put it down. So this became a daytime read for me. But if you have a thicker skin or not as new to the genre, you might be cool at night with this book. But I loved it. It was twisty. I loved the mysteries. And again, another thing that I loved about this book, but it is just jam-packed with so many just fierce, fabulous female characters. There's so many strong, interesting, just amazing women in this, and that was probably one of the things I loved the absolute most. I felt so connected, not just to Viv and Carly, but to the whole supporting cast of characters in both timelines, and I was in. Like, I was wholly invested. This book got me from the start. It was not a book I wanted to put down, and if you have not picked it up, you're missing out. Definitely get this book. The next book I read is A Man Called Uwe by Fredrik Backman. And I have read Beartown and Us Against You by Fredrik Backman, and I absolutely love them. I'm obsessed with them. I cannot wait for book number 3 to come out. And I have had so many people recommend this book to me, and this is like the unpopular opinion. I didn't love it. This kind of was like a 3 for me. And I know, I can already hear it, because when I talked about it in my monthly wrap up, people were like coming for me already. So what I will say is the writing is outstanding. It's beautiful. Fredrik Backman is beyond gifted, beyond amazing. He can spin a story and draw out beautiful characters, and I take nothing away from that. I had a really hard time getting into this book, and I understand why people like it. Like, I get it. It just wasn't for me in a lot of ways. And it wasn't about like connecting with the character or anything like that, but it was not a book that I felt compelled to pick back up again. And it took me probably to like 60 or 70% of the book in to then want to read the end of it. So I eventually did hit that point, but it took me a very long time. And I did take a lot of people's advice, and I did do the audiobook primarily. I read a little bit of it, but I mostly did the audiobook, and the audiobook was fantastic. And I definitely think that actually helped, even though I'm telling you guys, like, I didn't always want to go back to it. But I just found him frustrating, which I know you're supposed to. Like, I know he's the crotchety old man next door, and like at the beginning, like there were parts of it where I was like seeing myself in him, where I was like, I'm totally gonna be the crotchety old lady who's like, you're parking your bike where you're not supposed to, and you're not following the trash rules. Because I'm already kind of that person. We kind of go forwards and backwards in time, so we understand how Uwe became Uwe, basically how he got to this point, I would say. And he just like doesn't want to be bothered with people. Like, he doesn't want anyone to bug him. And these new neighbors move in across the street and basically kind of like run over his mailbox with their moving van when they move in. And just for better or for worse, and kind of almost through like a series of comedic events, they just keep inserting themselves into his life. And there are great moments, and there's very heartwarming moments, and I did actually tear up at the end of this book, but it took me a very long time to get there. And I knew it wasn't going to be Beartown, and I wasn't expecting it to be that. I just thought I would be more pulled in by the story, and ultimately it just wasn't for me. So it wasn't bad. And again, I appreciate what's really good about it. I just didn't really connect with it. I feel like that's it. I just didn't really sync up with the book, and maybe my expectations were too high. Maybe I was expecting too much from it, and maybe I was just sort of expecting to get swept away the way I was with Beartown and Us Against You. And the irony of all that being, when I read Beartown, that was 100% like a BookTube made me do it book, and I did not expect anything from that book. And from like page 2, I was like in tears over what an amazing writer he was, never mind how beautiful that story was, and gut-wrenching and heartbreaking and hopeful and just everything. But I'm glad I read it. I understand why a lot of people out there love it, but for me, this was not 5 stars. So the next book, actually, Sarah, Lindsay, and I did this as a buddy read, and it's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. So Lindsay also had this as her 5-star prediction, and then when we were talking about reading it, Sarah was like, I have it too and I want to read it. So we all read it together. And I have to say, like, I am not a buddy reader at all, because I don't like to be on other people's schedules or timelines, and I don't like to deviate from my moody reading. But I am so glad we did the buddy read, because it was so much fun to be able to talk about this book, because there's so much to this book, and just to be able to gush about it with other people who also just adored and loved this book as much as I did was such great fun. So I talked about this in my March wrap up. So I wound up post-it noting this book to death. It's not gonna focus, because I didn't want to fold over the pages, which is so not my MO. Like, you guys know, I write and I dog ear and all this stuff, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. So I was like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna buy a second copy because I'm a psychopath, and that's the book that I'm going to dog ear and do all the things to. But I wasn't gonna buy like the exact same book. No, I was gonna buy the UK edition because you can't have two of the same. Well, this is actually more beautiful than the first book. So not only is like the cover stunning, but then the naked cover has this beautiful happenings, and then the inside, and then even just there's like small differences in, there's not artwork in it, but there's a few sketches and things, but even just like the text of it. So I think this is going to be my perfect copy, and then I'm going to wind up going back and doing something here. And there's going to be another special edition coming out in October. So if you haven't already figured it out, 5 stars, hands down. This book is probably one of the most beautiful books in language and in words and in story that I've read. And I would compare it not in story, but in emotion and feeling and experience to what I had with Beartown. I cried and I just fell in love with Addie and Henry. So if you are not familiar with this book is about Addie, and it starts in 1714 in France. And she is about to get married, and she just does not want to get married. She doesn't want to marry this man. She doesn't want that life. She wants to experience life, and she wants to be independent, and she wants to be free. And she literally turns from her parents who are bringing her to the wedding and just starts to run through the woods, screaming and praying and asking for help and asking for a way out. And she has been warned to never pray to the gods who answer at night. And sure enough, a god answers at night. And she tells him he wants to be free, and he grants her wish. But what she doesn't know at the time are the levels and intricacies of the deal that she has just made with this god, Luke, who I was listening to a podcast with V.E. Schwab, and she was like, the God that answers her prayer and answers her calling is not the devil, but he is sort of one of the precursors to what eventually becomes and manifests as the devil. So very interesting. He is the baddest man you're ever going to meet in the woods at night. So what she comes to realize is that the terms of this deal and being able to be completely free and to live forever is in exchange for the fact that no one will ever remember her ever again. She goes to her parents' house and they don't know who she is. She goes to her best friend's house and she doesn't know who she is. And she could be sitting in a cafe and order a cup of coffee, and the barista leaves, goes to the back to get some scones, and then comes back and is like, wait, who are you? Can I help you? I have no idea who you are. So she has lived her entire life with nobody remembering her, even though she has all of these extraordinary experiences. And we fast forward 300 years, and she is living in New York City, and she goes into this bookshop because she is completely just obsessed and energized by and fascinated by arts and culture and books and music. And she, goes to this bookstore and gets a book and meets the guy who works at the counter named Henry. And then the next day she kind of does it all over again, because what else is she going to do? And when she goes back to the bookstore, he remembers her and not knows her backstory, not knows anything about her, but he was like, yeah, you were here yesterday. And her entire world just shifts. And she needs to understand who Henry is and why he remembers her and what's different about him. And it's their story, but then at the same time we go backwards in time and we see all of these sort of big memorable moments and small memorable moments that happened to Addie over the 300 years before. So there's like it's obviously magical realism and fantasy, but there's some historical elements to it. And V.E. Schwab weaves in actual historical events with made up historical events, but does it in a way that, with the exception of like really obvious references to things in history, it's also kind of like, is this a real thing or that I just don't know about, or is this not a real thing? And this was a 10 years in the making story for her as well. You guys know I'm obsessed with podcasts and I'm obsessed with all things authors, but I feel like you can feel every ounce of thought and love that went into this book, every word, how expertly it was chosen, every detail, and that this was not the book that she needed or could write 10 years ago or 7 years ago or 5 years ago. but it was the absolutely right book for her when she did write it. And I just think it is such an incredible accomplishment. And I just loved it so much. I can't wait. Like all three of us like finished the book and we're like, okay, can we start over again? Like it's that kind of a book. It's definitely a book I will be rereading. I think you can get more and more out of it every time that you read it. But you know, I've heard different people say it's slow or it's this or it's that. I was totally invested in the story. I don't do historical fiction. You guys know that. Like I don't gravitate towards it. I don't sync up well with historical fiction. It doesn't always work for me in a lot of ways. And I will say I very much enjoyed the present timeline of this more. But at the same time, the more I got into the historical and started to understand what story V.E. Schwab was telling and the importance of it, I was more invested in it as it went on. So it definitely took me as like a non-historical, non-classic reader a little bit to get into sort of like the rhythm and find my footing in the historical part of it. But once I did, I just was like so, like there were parts that I wish she had done more historically in certain decades than others, but I just loved it so much. I loved it so much. So I have only read one other V.E. Schwab book, so I cannot comment. I know even V.E. Schwab herself is like, I know it's not like other books and it's a deviation for me, but I think it's amazing, you guys. I really, really do. So 5 stars. 5. Or if you've read the book, 7. The next book I read was my very first Stephen King, and I read Pet Sematary. And oh my God, you guys. I talked about this a lot in my March wrap up also, but I really enjoyed this too, and definitely not a book to read at night. I am dipping a toe into horror, getting a little bit darker here, but the ghost horror bits, even though I can read really dark and messed up thrillers. And I had seen this movie. If you guys follow me, I'm sorry, I'm going to tell the same story 100 times, but I saw the original movie in high school, my friend's basement. It scared me to pieces, and it has always stuck with me, and I was really intimidated to read this book. So I did watch the original movie again after I read the book, and I feel like I've exorcised those demons, even though there were parts of it that were still really creepy. But this book was just so well done. And I have read On Writing by Stephen King, and I have followed a lot of his writing advice and interviews and things like that. So I have a lot of respect for him as a writer, but I really appreciated his writing in this book and the story. And a lot of people had said, you know, yes, there's horror and there's creep factors to this and all of that, but it's also fundamentally a story about grief, and that couldn't be more nail on the head. And I actually got super choked up at parts of this book, which I did not see coming. And I got extremely freaked out and grossed out and like had to take a step back, which I did see coming, but it was still not any less creepy. Like there were definitely some gross out points to this. There was definitely some creepy points to this. And I'm so glad I read it because I really enjoyed it. So this came out how many hundreds of years ago, but there's an introduction in here, an author's note, which is really good, that explains sort of his inspiration for the story, which is great. But this is about Dr. Lewis Creed, who moves his family to this small town in Maine because he gets a job as a doctor at a university there. And he's married, he has 2 young children, a daughter and then a toddler son named Gabe, and a cat named Church. And they move into this house, and across the street is this older couple, Judd and his wife, and they've lived there their whole lives. So the road that is between the Creed's house and Judd's house across the street has all these giant trailer trucks that is always going up and down. And Judd has this great line about how the road has used up a lot of animals. And right nearby the Creed's house, there is sort of this makeshift pet cemetery that for decades upon decades, kids in the town have buried their pets there. And when Church gets a little bit used up by the road, Judd introduces Lewis to the pet cemetery. And something definitely isn't quite right there. And this book is like so wonderfully creepy, but again, so terrifyingly real in the sense of sort of the depths that people will go to and the places people will go to when grief starts to consume them. And it's really like one heck of a ride. And I've heard a lot of people say, you know, it's not his best work, but it's not his worst work. And again, it's the only one I've read. So from my experience, A, I was terrified of it because of my experience with the movie. B, I don't really read horror, so I was scared. And C, like I wasn't expecting as emotional of a draw and pull and feeling from this. So I would put this at 5 stars for my experience. And that might change when I read more Stephen King, and I'm going to now bravely dip into some more Stephen King. I don't know where I'm going next. I do have Misery, but I think from an enjoyment standpoint, from a craft standpoint, from a writing standpoint, I knew a lot of the story going in because I had seen the movie, but it didn't diminish the reading experience for me at all. So I really loved it. And I talked about this in my wrap up as well. Sarah had recommended the audiobook because Michael C. Hall narrates it. And I actually wound up doing part of this on audio, but I found for me, I really wanted to read it and experience. And I actually like dog-eared a lot of this as well. Was not afraid to dog-ear this book. Should I call it cat earring? No. I'm being dumb. So the audiobook actually is really well done. And I will say that he gives such life and inflection and personality to Judd that had I not seen the original movie where I was picturing, you know, Herman Munster, Fred Gwynn in it, Michael C. Hall definitely gives the Judd character so much presence that I don't know that I would have had just straight up reading the book. So even if you do like a combo of both or you lean one way or the other, but yeah, you can't go wrong with having Dexter read you a horror book basically. So I loved it. I loved it. Loved it. And the last book I read is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And I have to say, you guys, I am amazed that I was not spoiled for this book, because this book came out in 1938 and so many books, now that I've read it, like I've heard authors say they were inspired by it. I've heard authors say that it's a retelling of this. I have heard authors allude to it so many times. And now that I've finished the book, I'm thinking about all these books that I've read and I'm like, yep, there's some Rebecca there. Yep, there's some Rebecca there. Oops, now I get it. And I kind of, in some weird way, feel like I'm in the club now. Like I feel like I totally get it. I feel like the curtain has been opened. I've been let behind the curtain and I totally understand it. I get it. I totally get it now. This book was tremendous. And I was so nervous about, it's 400 something pages. It's a classic. I felt like there was so much hype around it. It definitely took me a little bit from like a language standpoint, again, kind of like the historical parts of Addie, to kind of find my footing and find my rhythm. And I also wound up doing part of this on audiobook, which definitely was really, really good. I'm not going to spoil any of it, but if you, like me, did not really know much about Rebecca other than Manderley and that everybody talks about it, this is a story about a woman who we never actually know her name. And she winds up marrying this widower, Max de Winter, and she meets him while they're in Monte Carlo, and she is working kind of for like this wealthy American, not so nice woman. And over the course of a couple weeks, she's swept off her feet by Max and they wind up getting married. And he brings her back to his estate, Manderley, in Cornwall. And she comes to find out that his first wife, Rebecca, has died tragically a year ago. And everyone is rather shocked that he comes back from this trip to Monte Carlo with a wife. And some people, like the housekeeper, Mrs. Danvers, are downright resentful of the fact that he has brought somebody back, married her, and that this woman, the new second Mrs. de Winter, is trying to take Rebecca's place. And it's this very gothic, psychological thriller, mystery, sort of slow burn unraveling, all these different people with sort of different motivations. And there's like a 20-year age gap between Max de Winter and the second Mrs. de Winter. And she's very naive and she doesn't come from much and she doesn't really have sort of the same class and elegance and poise that Rebecca had. And she's finding it very difficult to live up to that. She's finding it very difficult to stand up for herself, and she's finding it very difficult to come out of Rebecca's shadow. And she's trying to do everything she can just to make Max fall in love with her. And again, like I said, I was not spoiled for this book, so I didn't know where it was going, and I didn't know what was going to happen next. And I loved that about it. And I really got into it pretty quickly. And I kind of like gobbled it up and wanted to know. And I loved it. And of course I did what I do, and I started to do a little bit of research afterwards, and I'm desperate to see the Alfred Hitchcock movie of it, which you like legit can't find anywhere. Like you can buy the DVD or roll the dice and hope that Turner Classic Movies shows it sometime, but I went on Turner and it's not showing anytime soon. And I did read that they made some changes to it, but it's just sort of this very creepy, dark, atmospheric book. I feel like everybody knows sort of the book, even if you don't know the story, and everybody knows the last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again, opening line. And I would say if you are any kind of thriller reader, this is definitely a great book to read, and I can't believe it took me this long to read it. And I can see where it inspires other writers and where it inspires different stories and where people take little nuggets from it. And I almost feel like I understand certain books more, and I hesitate to say some of the books because I don't want to give anything away. Not that any book is like a direct ripoff of it or anything like that, but it was just such a good book. And this is a book that I really felt almost like low-key guilty about having not read before, and like I really was missing out on something. And like I said, I totally get it now. So 5 stars for sure. This is definitely a book that I would read again. This is a book that I also think that I will get more out of each time I read it. The lasting legacy of this book is just incredible to me, but I would highly recommend it. And I just think it's so beautifully done. It's so well done. I loved the dark Gothic, just dark and messed up people doing dark and messed up things in 1938. Yes, I never thought I was gonna find my people in a book from the 30s, and which sounds so silly, right? But it's nice to know that if I was alive then, there would have been a book for me back in the day too. So that's gonna do it for my 5-star predictions. This was so much fun, you guys. And I have to say, I was saying this to Sarah and Lindsay the other day, like I was so resistant in so many ways because I don't make a TBR, I don't like to plan, I don't like to be on a schedule, I don't like to be on a timeline for things. With the exception of Uwe, which again, I understand why people love the book, it just is not my book. Like it's not a book that I would ever read again or go back to. I was pleasantly surprised, so happy that I did this, so grateful that I pushed myself to read a lot of these books and to not read just straight up thrillers across the board. So all that to say, this was amazing fun. And one more time, if you have not checked out Sarah and Lindsay's videos, definitely do that. And if you are here because of them and that's how you found me, thanks for coming by and spending some of your time with me. And thanks to everyone for being here. Let me know if you've read any of these books, thoughts, feelings, all the things down below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye everybody.